Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the usual noise and really focus on what's going on. Today we're looking at India's economy. Its pulse, you could say. But, this isn't just going to be about the usual headlines, GDP figures, inflation rates. We see those everywhere. Our mission today is, well, to get behind those numbers. What do they actually mean for you, for the millions living through it all? And I think for the soul of this young nation, it's balancing tradition and massive change. We want to understand the human behavior that's driving all this data.
Exactly. And what's really insightful, I think, is that these big macroeconomic stats, they aren't just abstract concepts. They're direct reflections of, well, millions of families just trying to navigate daily life. Every single number, whether it's growth or unemployment, it connects back to someone's hopes, their struggles maybe with rising school fees, or just that constant search for, stable work. Understanding that human story behind the figures, that's absolutely vital if you want to grasp what's really happening in India's economy.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. So where does India stand right now, say mid-2025? It's a complex picture, isn't it? The Ministry of Finance, the RBI, their update from April projected GDP growth for this fiscal year, 24-25, at 6.9%.
Still pretty robust.
Yeah, it's a slight dip from the 7.2% the year before, but still quite significant on the global stage.
And we have seen some positive movement on inflation. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index, it's moderated to about 4.5%.
Okay. And why is that?
Well, it seems to be mostly down to food prices coming off a bit and also some really quite impressive improvements in how supply chains are managed across the country. That's made a difference.
Right. But there's always a but, isn't there? The job market, that seems to be a persistent challenge. The CMIE data, that's the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, they track this independently. They have unemployment hovering around 7.8%.
Yeah, and what really jumps out from that data consistently is youth unemployment, especially in urban India. That remains a major, major concern for a lot of people.
It does. On the other hand, maybe a more positive note, if we look slightly broader, the fiscal deficit.
Ah, yes, that's looking better. Down to 5.1% of GDP, which is, a commendable improvement compared to where things were during the pandemic peaks.
And that ties into the overall stability picture too, right? Like the Forex reserves.
Absolutely. India is sitting on a strong cushion there, over $620 billion in foreign exchange reserves. That provides a really vital buffer against, global shocks or economic uncertainties. It covers many months of imports. It's a solid position.
It is solid, but it's easy to get kind of lost in these big top-line numbers, isn't it? What really fascinates me is how these things actually play out in people's lives. You get these really compelling stories. Like there's this example of a 26-year-old MBA student, Tier 2 city. She's sharp, driven, totally comfortable with digital tech. But she's facing this incredibly tough job market. Corporates seem to want experienced people, and even internships are often unpaid. So she's looking at this whole India shining narrative and asking, well, does it actually include me? My hopes.
That's a powerful question, and it resonates. Or, think about a small business owner, say in Jaipur. They're trying to get formal credit, maybe through government schemes like PM Vishwakarma for artisans, or the ECLGS, which helped during COVID. Schemes designed to help.
Right, designed to make funding accessible.
Exactly, but then they hit these walls. Complex paperwork, digital hurdles, it just making it incredibly difficult to actually get the support they need on the ground.
So these aren't just like one-off stories then. These feel like they point to something bigger, patterns in economic behavior that you might miss if you just look at the macro stats.
Absolutely. And this brings up a really crucial point, I think. Economic confidence. It's deeply emotional. It's profound, really. It's not just about the numbers. It's about, well, trust. Trust in the system, clarity in policy, and maybe most importantly, the ability for people to actually dream, to plan a future without being crushed by debt.
That emotional confidence, it creates a feedback loop, doesn't it?
It really does, especially in a developing economy like India. If policies aren't clear or if bureaucratic obstacles just persist, it doesn't just slow down one business, it can actually slow down the whole velocity of money, of investment right across the system. Cautious feelings become real economic drag. That's why, behavioral economists are increasingly saying consumer sentiment, business confidence, these are just as vital as the quote-unquote hard stats.
Is there data on that sentiment?
Yeah, the RBI's Consumer Confidence Index from this year actually shows this quite well. It's mixed. You see noticeable Optimism, perhaps surprisingly, in rural India, but that contrasts quite sharply with a much more cautious feeling in the big metro areas. And that caution in the cities, it seems largely driven by those ongoing worries about inflation, plus global instability feels, well, closer to home there.
Okay, so if that emotional confidence, that trust is so critical, how are government policies trying to shape this? And are they translating into real shifts? Let's maybe switch focus to that. India's current economic agenda, seen through the data, things like Make in India and the PLI schemes, the production-linked incentives.
Right. The PLI schemes are significant. We're talking about an investment of around 2 lakh crore rupees. That's roughly 24 billion US dollars channeled into 14 key sectors. And we are definitely seeing growth spurred by this in areas like electronics, pharmaceuticals, textiles. Those are clear examples.
That's their catch.
Well, the challenge highlighted in the data is the surprisingly low participation from the MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises.
Why is that?
The digital divide is a big part of it. It's still a major barrier for many smaller businesses to even access these programs, to navigate the applications.
So it's a bottleneck. If the goal is broad-based growth, having MSMEs left out is a problem. Is it just the digital divide, or are there other things making it hard for them?
It's a mix. From what the sources suggest, digital literacy and infrastructure, yes, but also often just a lack of awareness that these schemes even exist or apply to them. And crucially, the compliance burden, the paperwork, the reporting, it can be quite heavy, and larger companies just have the resources to handle it more easily than a small shop.
Right. So it points towards needing maybe more tailored outreach,
Yeah.
simpler frameworks for the smaller players.
Exactly. That seems to be the implication.
Okay. Policy is one thing, but you mentioned the digital side. India's leap into the digital economy is just phenomenal. How is that showing up in numbers and, on the ground?
Oh, the data there is genuinely striking. UPI, the Unified Payments Interface, just look at May 2025 alone, over 14 billion transactions.
14 billion in 1 month.
In 1 month. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's more digital payment volume than many developed nation systems handle combined. It shows the sheer scale, the everyday reliance on digital payments now. And this whole digital public infrastructure, the DPI, it's built on things like ONDC, the Open Network for Digital Commerce.
Which is shaking up e-commerce.
Right, decentralizing it. And the Aadhaar stack underneath it all, it's profoundly reshaping how business gets done. But, hurdles remain. Cybersecurity is a constant concern, obviously, and regional adoption making sure less connected areas aren't left behind.
And sticking with big shifts, India is also pushing hard on the green economy front. What's the data saying there?
Indeed. Budget 2025 allocated a significant chunk of 35,000 crores specifically for green energy projects. And the ambition is huge, aiming for 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy capacity by 2030. A massive goal.
But how does that square with current reality?
Well, that's the balancing act, because right now coal still powers over 55% of the country's electricity. So it just highlights the sheer scale of the transition that's needed, its ambitious targets versus present-day energy demands.
And beyond the big infrastructure, green energy, there's the direct human element too, like welfare, direct benefit transfers, DBT. That was a landmark change. What are the latest insights?
The numbers are staggering. This year alone, something like 2.1 lakh crore, that's over 25 billion USD, dispersed via DBT.
Wow.
It shows how fundamentally these direct transfers are changing welfare delivery, bypassing intermediaries, boosting financial inclusion for millions. Yet the challenge of digital exclusion is still there, particularly in tribal and remote areas. The benefits don't always reach absolutely everyone easily.
And you mentioned ambitious efforts. What about something like the Gati Shakti plan? That sounds huge.
Oh, it is. Gati Shakti National Master Plan. It's fascinating, really. It integrates 16 different ministries onto a single digital platform. The whole goal is to speed up infrastructure project delivery, cut down delays, improve logistics. It's genuinely one of India's most ambitious attempts ever at economic orchestration, trying to connect all the dots for faster development.
Truly a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears slightly again. We've talked policy, we've talked infrastructure. What about how people themselves are behaving differently in this new economy? This isn't just about top-down initiatives. It's about how people are living, spending, investing.
Yeah, and there are some really striking shifts. One major one is this move from a very traditional savings-focused mindset towards, more consumption and different kinds of investment. You see Gen Z, millennials. They're increasingly putting money into experiences, not just, say, buying property or gold, like previous generations might have prioritized. And their investment portfolios look different, too. SIPs, Systematic investment plans are common, stocks, even crypto. It reflects a bigger appetite for diverse investments, maybe quicker returns.
So it's like a fundamental rewiring of traditional financial habits. That's quite a cultural change.
It feels like it. It probably reflects growing confidence in some segments, maybe a desire for more immediate gratification, definitely access to new digital tools that just weren't there before. But the flip side, the challenge, is that financial literacy hasn't always kept pace, so there's a risk there too.
Hmm. Another interesting trend seems to be around migration. We used to talk mainly about the flow to cities, but post-pandemic, there's this idea of rural resilience.
Yes, that's a really interesting post-pandemic phenomenon. A lot of skilled workers who might have otherwise stayed in cities went back to their rural homes. And many haven't just gone back to old ways. They're integrating into new sectors right there. Agritech is booming in places. Rural startups are emerging. People are using gig platforms like Dahat or Gramophone, which are focused on agriculture and rural autonomies. It points to this growing resilience, new kinds of economic activities sprouting up outside the big urban centers. It's sort of decentralizing growth a bit.
Fascinating. And finally, the big one, the entrepreneurial boom. The startup numbers are incredible, but what's the reality behind the headlines for the founders themselves? You mentioned a silent stress.
Yeah, India now has over 100,000 registered startups as of 2025. An amazing number, truly. But beneath that vibrant surface, you find many founders are really grappling with significant mental health challenges. Burnout is incredibly common. Funding uncertainties create constant pressure. And this silent stress, it's rarely discussed in purely economic terms, but it's critical. It maybe suggests that while India is great at encouraging the quantity of startups, there's an urgent need to improve the quality of life and the sustainability support within that ecosystem.
That's a really powerful point. It kind of flips the script on the usual glossy startup stories. What happens if that silent stress isn't addressed? What are the implications?
Well, the risk is clear, isn't it? A high churn rate startups failing, not just because of bad ideas, but because the founders burn out, loss of really experienced talent from the ecosystem, and potentially it could dampen the entrepreneurial spirit itself over time. Sustainable innovation needs more than just capital and ideas. It needs an environment that actually looks after the well-being of the people driving it.
It really brings it back to the human element. India's economy, it's not just a system, is it? It's a story. A story that's woven with, I don't know, struggle and spirit, contradictions and courage.
Beautifully put. And I think whether you're listening to this as a policy student trying to understand the details, or maybe you're a startup dreamer in the thick of it, or a business leader looking for what's next, just remember this. The data gives you the skeleton, but the emotion, the human experience, that's the heartbeat. And together, that's what makes a living, breathing economy. And maybe a final thought. For India's growth story to be truly sustainable, genuinely inclusive, it has to find that balance. Balance digital ambition with human dignity. Balance fiscal prudence with social inclusion. And maybe, just maybe, balance gross domestic product with something like gross national happiness.
A powerful thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into India's economic story. If this discussion made you think a bit deeper about the policies, the people, maybe even your own place in this whole picture, please do share it with someone. Until next time, remember, economics isn't just about money. It's about meaning. Jai Hind.